So today we're going to do a bit of Q&A. A student recently emailed me who wanted to be anonymous. We'll say her name is Deborah. Deborah emailed me the following. Dimitri, I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been following you for the last 6 months. I am currently getting a master's of mathematical finance. However, I'm debating on getting a PhD. Do you think it is worth getting a PhD if I'd like to work in quantitative finance? So really it comes down to two questions that you need to ask yourself, which is essentially almost the same question, but one, do you want to work in academia? And two, does your career require it? So it's the same question, the fact that if you want to work in academia, your career does require it. However, there are a few other careers, especially in quantitative finance, that do require a PhD. And just in general terms, if you're looking at getting a PhD and you want to do a very specific career, look at it and figure out if it's required or not. So basically, if the answer is yes to either one of those questions, then you should go get a PhD. It's definitely worth it. If that's what you want to do for a living, it's a good choice and a good decision. So one reason not to get a PhD is the financial aspect of it. If your career does not require a PhD and you don't want to work in academia, I would recommend not getting a PhD. And this comes down again to the cost. So any good PhD program that you are joining, they should more or less pay for your basic expenses of living and your tuition in exchange for you to conduct research and to do teaching, like a teaching assistant or a teacher in general. However, the real cost of the PhD is the time sacrificed. So I'm not going to get into the quality of PhDs. Some PhDs are as short as 3 years. I'm not the biggest fan of these for a variety of reasons. Typical PhDs take between like 5 and 7. And so the cost is your time. So if you were to go get a professional job and you were to work, say, for 5 to 7 years with a master's degree, where would you be versus if you went from a master's degree and got a PhD? Are you going to come in at the same level as someone with a master's and 5 to 7 years experience? Or would you probably come in a little lower? In general, you're going to come in lower. But again, there are specific roles such as quantitative finance research, and many of these positions require a PhD. So if you would like to do this type of work, then you need the PhD. However, if you are doing something else in quantitative finance and you have a master's in like mathematical finance, such as this student does, or if you have a financial engineering degree or a master's in statistics and you really think you can work hard and more or less pass the competition, then it's far better, in my opinion at least, to get a master's degree and then to work hard for 5 to 7 years, and you will more or less be financially ahead of where you would have been than if you would have went out and got a PhD. So now to answer this as me personally, I talk to a lot of colleagues and they always kind of bring up like PhDs and we discuss them. And they always are shocked to find out that I actually want to go back and get a PhD at some point. I don't know if I really will or not, but it's a desire of mine. From this perspective, I'm not going back more or less for the financial gains. It would cost me money and time basically to go back and get a PhD, and it would not increase my earning potential. However, it'd be a hobby for me. I love to teach. I love doing research. When I get older, I'd love to actually be a professor in a university, and to do this, I would need a PhD to work in academia. So in general, another exception to the PhD of getting one or not is the fact if you really love school and you really want the PhD, you have to realize there's going to be a trade-off in the fact that it's going to cost you more financially, but maybe the joy and happiness you get out of it far outweighs the financial aspect. And so if your goal is to be very happy and doing research and continuing to learn makes you happier than the financial gains that you could make, then it's definitely a good idea to get a PhD in that sense. So there is actually a wrong reason to get a PhD, and this is extremely common. I see this all the time. Many students I went to school with, as well as those in the industry, they have this connotation that having a PhD makes you better than me. Or in general, it makes you better than everybody else that doesn't have a PhD. So this negative attitude is really frustrating for those of us who don't have PhDs. And the reason is because, yes, you have a PhD, you have more experience. So theoretically, or at least in your mind, you should be smarter. So this is not the case in practice. I have seen people with a master's degree, 2-year master's degree, graduated, went out, continued to learn as much as possible by working in the industry. And these people more or less put out more personal research or research for their corporation than their counterparts who do have PhDs. They end up creating better models, whether you're developing models, validating them. They're just better at their job because they understand it far better than some of their PhD counterparts. And in general, they seem to be more well adapted to work in the industry, and they're better employees. So again, this isn't all masters are better than PhDs or all PhDs are better than masters. A PhD is very valuable in the fact it gives you a very solid base to conduct research, and it helps continue your education. However, if it's not required for your job, I don't recommend it because you can typically surpass the information you would gain from a PhD and might even go beyond all the PhDs, which I have seen people do, if you continue to learn while you're in your work setting and you kind of study and learn in your personal time. So those are my thoughts and opinions on whether you should get a PhD or not. Again, this is a fairly personal question. It's not something as cut and dry as like, yes, you should get it and everyone should get it if this requires, and no, you shouldn't get it, if you don't meet these requirements. But in general, those are kind of my thoughts and like an easier way to think about the problem of whether you should get a PhD or not. So Deborah, I hope that answers your question. If you guys have any other questions regarding quantitative finance, career development, school, anything you want me to cover in a video, or if you just want an email response, feel free to email me or contact me through YouTube, LinkedIn, or you can just throw a comment below. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time. Thanks for watching my video. If you find it helpful, please like, share, and subscribe.